I always thought my life was built on trust. Every morning, I'd wake up to the comforting scent of Ethan's cologne lingering in the sheets, the gentle hum of the coffee maker warming our kitchen. Our home felt like a fortress, a safe haven where laughter echoed through every room. But that night, everything shifted. A crumpled receipt, hidden in the pocket of Ethan's jacket, caught my eye, a tiny slip of paper that didn't belong. It was for a child's birthday gift, purchased in a city I had never even visited. My hands shook as I read the words, my heart thudding so loudly it drowned out the silence of our bedroom. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a mistake, a harmless secret, but deep down, a cold dread was already forming in the pit of my stomach. I had always trusted Ethan, believed every word he spoke. That night, though, that small, innocent receipt tore through the illusions I'd so carefully built around us. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, the glow of the bedside lamp painting flickering shadows across the room. My thoughts raced, looping back to that receipt again and again. What else was he hiding from me? How much of our life together was real, and how much was just a story he told to keep me from seeing the truth? I knew I couldn't sleep, not with those questions gnawing at the edge of my mind. And deep down, I felt something I hadn't wanted to admit. My world wasn't as solid as I thought. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that settled over me like a fog. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many little things didn't add up. Late-night phone calls, sudden business trips that never seemed to matter before. They all came flooding back, each one a tiny crack in the walls I'd trusted so blindly. My chest ached as I replayed every smile, every promise Ethan had ever made to me. Was it all just a performance? The next morning, I went through his things with a careful hand, my breath catching in my throat with every photo, every receipt I found. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to discover the truth I'd been too afraid to see. My fingers traced the edge of a photograph I didn't remember taking, and for a moment, I wanted to scream. I kept it all inside, though. I had to. The pain was sharp, but so was my focus. I realized I didn't want to confront him right away, not until I knew everything, not until I was sure. My heart was breaking, but beneath the heartbreak, a quiet determination began to take root. I knew I couldn't trust his words anymore. I had to find out for myself. And in that moment, I promised myself I would. So I started searching, piecing together the fragments of his other life. Late at night, when he was asleep beside me, I'd scroll through his social media, every tagged photo and check-in like a puzzle piece slipping into place. My pulse would quicken every time I found a new clue. A picture of Ethan with a woman I didn't know, children with his eyes and his easy smile. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut, yet I couldn't look away. I had to see it, had to know just how deep his lies ran. There were nights I'd sit in the kitchen, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. I could almost feel the walls closing in, the weight of this secret pressing down on my shoulders. But even through the fear and the heartbreak, I felt a spark, a fierce, unyielding spark that told me I was done being blind. The truth was mine to uncover, and I wasn't going to stop until I had every last piece. I was tired of feeling small, of living in the shadow of his choices. I didn't know what I'd find next, but I was ready. My hands were shaking as I shut the laptop, but my mind was clear. My whole world wasn't just built on lies. It was shared with another family. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to follow the truth wherever it led, no matter how much it hurt. Because deep down, I understood that the only way to reclaim my life was to see his for what it really was. In the days that followed, I didn't let Ethan see what I was piecing together. I smiled when he walked through the door, acted like nothing was wrong, but inside, every word, every gesture felt like a performance. I'd always thought I'd confront him right away if something like this ever happened. But now, all I felt was a cold, eerie calm. I didn't want to shout. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see the full picture before I let the truth shatter whatever we had left. So I kept digging, each discovery a quiet triumph. Her name was Emily, a name that sounded so ordinary yet carried so much weight. She looked happy in every photo, her eyes full of trust and warmth, a woman who believed she was married to the perfect man. My heart ached for her in a way I hadn't expected. I saw in her reflection everything I'd lost, everything I was about to lose. And I realized she didn't even know I existed. I could have hated her, but I didn't. That was the strangest part. Instead of rage, I felt this deep, unsettling curiosity. Who was she, really? What had she been told? Did she know she was living in the same illusion I was? The thought of meeting her face to face terrified me, but also, it felt necessary. I needed answers, not just for me, but for her too. And so I decided I would find her. I would look her in the eyes and finally see the truth for myself. I spent hours imagining how that first meeting would go. My mind played out every possibility, every word I might say, and how she might react. But the truth was, no script could prepare me for the weight of this betrayal. I wondered if she'd see the same flicker of doubt in my eyes that I saw in hers in those photos. I wondered if she'd feel the same hollow ache in her chest, the slow realization that everything we thought we knew was built on shifting sand. Some nights, I'd lay in bed, Ethan's steady breathing beside me, and feel like I was suffocating. The walls of our bedroom, once warm and familiar, felt like a prison. My thoughts would drift to Emily, to the life she must have built with him, the memories that were hers alone. I wondered if she knew the taste of his laughter, the way his hand felt when he traced circles on her back. Those tiny, intimate things that once felt like mine and mine alone. It was strange how quiet my mind had become, though. The anger that should have consumed me was replaced by something else, a steely calm that kept me grounded. I didn't want to lash out. I wanted to understand. I needed to know the full story, not just the half-truths Ethan had let slip through the cracks. And the only person who could help me do that was the woman he'd lied to as easily as he'd lied to me. So I did what felt both impossible and inevitable. I reached out to Emily. My hands trembled as I typed that first message, every word carefully chosen to hide the hurricane of emotion inside me. I told her I wanted to meet for coffee, that I had something important to discuss. I didn't say more, not yet. I knew she would be curious, maybe even suspicious, but I also knew she'd come. Because deep down, she deserved the truth as much as I did. The day I sent that message, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. It was like opening a door I could never close again, but somehow I was ready for whatever lay on the other side. I'd spent so long living in the shadow of Ethan's secrets that the idea of shining a light on them, of seeing them for what they really were, felt liberating. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for both of us. For the lives we'd built on his lies. I didn't know how Emily would react, or what we'd say when we finally sat across from each other, but I knew one thing for sure. He thought he could keep us apart, like two chapters of the same story that would never meet. But he was wrong. I was going to prove him wrong. When I first saw Emily in that little cafe, my heart skipped a beat. She looked so different from how I'd imagined, softer, more real, with nervous eyes that darted around the room. My palms were clammy as I approached her table, every step a blur of fear and anticipation. She smiled politely, clearly unsure why I'd asked her here. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every secret that brought us to that moment. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a reckoning. I sat down across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The smell of coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but my mind was too busy racing to notice. Emily's voice was gentle as she asked what this was about, a kindness I didn't deserve but needed more than anything. For a moment, I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. But I knew I couldn't turn back now. She deserved the truth, even if it would tear our worlds apart. "I know about your family," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I watched her eyes widen in confusion, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Because I'm part of it too." Those words felt like an earthquake, shaking the table between us. Emily's fork clattered to her plate, her face draining of color as she realized exactly what I was saying. We sat there, two women bound by the same betrayal, our lives colliding in the most unexpected way. The silence that followed felt deafening. Emily's eyes searched mine, flickering with disbelief, anger, and something else. A deep, quiet pain that mirrored my own. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe around us seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in this tiny pocket of heartbreak and revelation. My hands trembled, but I kept them still, fighting the urge to reach out and comfort her. I knew she didn't owe me anything, but in that moment, I felt like we were both victims of the same cruel lie. Slowly, Emily began to find her voice, though it was shaky and unsure. She asked me how I knew, what I'd seen, what I'd discovered. I told her everything I could. The receipt, the photos, the little pieces that had all added up to this moment. Her shoulders slumped as the weight of it settled on her. And as she listened, her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She was stronger than I'd imagined, and her quiet composure only made my own heart ache more. We sat there for what felt like hours, trading pieces of the story back and forth. Her voice cracked as she told me about the nights she'd spent waiting for Ethan to come home, about the promises he'd made to her, the same ones he'd whispered to me in the dark. It was like seeing my own pain reflected back at me, but sharper, clearer. And in that shared heartbreak, something unexpected began to take root, a fragile understanding that we were no longer enemies, but two women bound by the same truth. As the cafe grew busier around us, our worlds stayed locked in that quiet corner, where the truth hung heavy between each word we shared. Emily's hands shook when she told me about the nights he'd held her close, the small things he'd done to make her feel special, the same things he'd done for me. It was a bitter, silent chorus, each line echoing in my mind. We were both living the same lie, and it was like a mirror that showed me everything I'd tried so hard to ignore. I realized then how deeply I'd needed this moment, not just for answers, but for the strange, unexpected comfort of being seen. Emily and I didn't have to pretend with each other, no more smiling through tears or laughing at jokes that weren't funny. She understood the betrayal in my bones because she carried it in hers, too. In that instant, I felt a fragile thread of connection begin to weave between us, something that felt almost like relief. When we finally stood up to leave, there were no promises made, no grand plans laid out. Just a quiet understanding that we couldn't pretend anymore, not to ourselves, and certainly not to each other. We walked out of that cafe as two women who had lost everything they thought they knew, but who had found something new in its place, the strength to see the truth and the courage to face it head on. Two women who should have been enemies, now united by the same betrayal. In the days that followed, Emily and I spoke more than I ever expected. We met in quiet places, coffee shops, empty parks, away from the lives we were still pretending to live. Each conversation was like stitching together a quilt of lies, every detail filling in the gaps of Ethan's double life. Sometimes, Emily would break down mid-sentence, her voice catching as she pieced together memories that no longer felt real. I'd listen, my own heart breaking, because I knew exactly how she felt. There were nights I lay awake replaying it all in my mind. The dates that didn't add up, the smiles that suddenly seemed too practiced, The trips, he said, were for work. Each puzzle piece fit so perfectly that I wondered how I hadn't seen it sooner. But I also knew that shame wouldn't change the past. What mattered now was the truth we had between us, raw and ugly and real. And somehow, in the midst of all that pain, I felt relief. I think that's what surprised me most. How clear everything felt now. For so long, I'd been living in a fog of half-truths and pretty lies. But standing there with Emily, looking at the whole picture for the first time, I felt something shift. The betrayal was still a fresh wound, but at least I knew where I stood. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a way forward. One built on the truth, not his version of it. Emily and I didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that felt like enough for now. We'd trade stories and memories late into the night, filling in every gap Ethan had left between us. There were moments when the weight of it all was too much to bear, and we'd just sit in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. But even in those quiet spaces, I felt her presence like a promise. We weren't alone anymore. One night, Emily told me about a time she'd asked Ethan if he was hiding something, how he'd laughed and brushed it off like it was nothing. My chest tightened as I realized I'd heard those same words before, spoken in the same dismissive tone. It was like we were living in parallel worlds, our lives echoing each other's in ways we never imagined. And in that moment, I knew that confronting him wasn't just about what he'd done to me. It was about standing up for both of us. The choice was clear, even if it hurt. We were done living in his shadow, done letting him dictate the truth of our own lives. Emily and I made a quiet pact that night, not with vows or promises, but with the simple understanding that we wouldn't let him steal any more of our futures. We didn't need him to make things right. We'd do it ourselves. We started to plan what came next, each step feeling like a small victory over the life he'd tried to keep us trapped in. There was no need for anger, just the simple, unshakable resolve that we deserved better. Emily and I talked about the practical things first, how to protect ourselves, how to gather the evidence we'd need if he tried to fight back. But beneath it all was a quiet, shared promise that we wouldn't let him define our stories anymore. Some nights, I'd find myself almost smiling at how far we'd come. It wasn't the laughter of happiness, but of relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. I realized that the woman I'd become in those weeks was stronger than the one who'd once believed in Ethan's easy lies. And that strength wasn't just mine. It was something Emily and I had built together, piece by piece, in the aftermath of everything he'd tried to keep from us. When I looked at Emily, I didn't see the other woman anymore. I saw someone who had been hurt just like me, someone who deserved the truth as much as I did. We didn't need to shout or scream to make ourselves heard. We just had to walk away from his lies, knowing that we were finally free to write the rest of our story, one that didn't include him. The day I left Ethan wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no final arguments, just a quiet, cold decision that this was the end. I packed my things with a calm I didn't know I was capable of, each folded shirt and tucked away photo a silent goodbye. Emily did the same, in her own home, miles away, but connected to me in every way that mattered. We didn't need his permission to leave. We didn't need anything from him anymore. It felt almost surreal to walk out of the house we'd built together, a house that had become a monument to half-truths and broken promises. The air outside was warm, a soft summer breeze that felt like a small blessing. I took a deep breath and let it fill me, the weight in my chest easing with every step I took away from that place. For the first time in so long, I felt the faintest flicker of hope, not for what we'd lost, but for what lay ahead. I didn't look back. There was no need. I knew that whatever came next would be mine to claim, and that was enough. The betrayal still burned, but it no longer defined me. I had faced the truth, seen it for what it was, and survived. Now it was time to build something new, something honest, even if it wasn't perfect. And that thought, that tiny spark of freedom, was all I needed to keep moving forward. Emily and I met again a few days later, this time not as co-conspirators or even as victims, but as two women who had reclaimed their own stories. We sat at a small cafe just like that first time, but the weight in the air was gone. She smiled at me as she stirred her coffee, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. And I felt my own smile in return, one that reached all the way to my heart. We had been broken by the same man, but we had put the pieces back together ourselves. Our conversations weren't about him anymore. We talked about work, about the little things that made us laugh, about the dreams we'd almost forgotten we had. It felt like shedding a skin, letting go of everything that had kept us small and scared. I realized then that I didn't need to be defined by his betrayal, that my life was bigger than the lies he'd built around it. And Emily, she understood that too. There was a moment when we both fell silent, just watching the world move around us. The hum of conversations, the clink of cups and spoons. It struck me how powerful that silence was. We didn't have to fill it with explanations or apologies. We were here, we were alive, and we were free. And in that quiet, I felt the first real peace I'd known in years. When I raised my coffee cup that day, I felt like I was toasting to something so much bigger than just moving on. Emily raised hers too, and for a moment, we just sat there, two women who had been pulled apart and put back together in ways we never could have imagined. I looked at her and saw not just a survivor of his lies, but someone who had found her own strength in the wreckage. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. "He thought he could break us apart," I said quietly, the words soft but sure. "But we're stronger than he'll ever be." Emily's eyes shone as she nodded, and in that simple gesture, I felt the truth of it settle deep inside me. He had built two lives out of lies, but in the end, he'd lost them both. We hadn't just survived, we'd grown, found something real in the aftermath of everything he'd tried to hide. As we left the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of his betrayal was still there, but it didn't own me anymore. I had my own story now, one that was built on truth and on the quiet power of choosing myself. And as Emily and I walked away, side by side, I knew that no matter what came next, we were free. He built two lives on lies, and in the end, lost both.